So this is how you end a marriage, Adrian? Selena's voice was steady, holding a slip of paper in her hand. Adrian smirked. It's bold, it's final, and it's mine. Divorce. Written for the whole street to see. Selena's lips curved into the faintest smile. Then wait until you see my reply. He frowned, but by the time he turned back, the note on the door had changed. His heart sank as he read the words she left behind. House sold. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe for more thrilling stories, like this video, and share it with your friends. Now, let's dive into the unforgettable story of the divorce paper and the sold house. Selena Hartwell stopped 2 steps from her front porch, the key still pressed into her palm. A sheet of printer paper was glued to the door at eye level, the edges wrinkled where whoever did it had pressed too hard. 3 words were scrawled across the page in black marker, letters thick and impatient. I want a divorce. Her first instinct was not to gasp, but to laugh, quietly, the sort of laugh that never makes a sound. Of course Adrian would do it like this. Not a conversation. A billboard. She set her toe on the top step and took one slow breath. The marker strokes were familiar, the slant of the W like a knife. The glue had bled a milky halo around the edges. In the heat, it was still tacky. He hadn't posted it long ago. He wanted the message fresh and visible, wanted neighbors to stroll past with their dogs, and carry the spectacle down the street like a parade. Rough day. Mr. Blake called from across the hedges, watering and tilting toward his peonies. He was the kind of neighbor who always pretended to notice nothing and somehow noticed everything. Selena glanced over. Depends who you ask. He followed her gaze, then winced. Adrian. Who else writes like a warning label? She said softly. Mr. Blake hesitated, then lifted a hand in apology and disappeared into his yard. Good man. He'd let the street whisper without feeding it. Selena turned back to the door. The note looked self-satisfied. That was the part that almost made her smile for real, the performance of it. Adrian Cole, lover of grand gestures, teller of final truths, declarer by signage. She reached up, not to tear it, only to test the glue with the tip of her nail. It gave a little. He hadn't used tape. Of course he hadn't. Tape is quiet. Glue is permanent. He'd always liked things that said they were impossible to undo. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian, 3 bubbles, then a single line. Saw it yet? No greeting. No name. No question mark. She typed back nothing. Let the bubbles in his head, not on her screen, do the work. A memory flared and vanished. Last night's silence. The fork he set down as if it had offended him. The way he said you make everything a debate when she had only asked where the kindness went. The truth was simpler than the drama he preferred. He needed an audience for his certainty. A glued note was an audience in paper form. Footsteps scuffed on the sidewalk. Eleanor Price, all sunglasses and curiosity, slowed just enough to read the door, then hurried past as if speed could erase the fact that she'd looked. The street had its own kind of camera, dozens of eyes that recorded and replayed. Selena let them. Every eye was a mirror today, and Adrian had dressed for it. She lifted her phone and took one clean photo. The white of the paper bright against the blue door, the words centered, unblinking. Evidence, yes, but not for court. For memory. For the moment she would later name. The day he chose spectacle over conversation, and lost something he didn't know he was gambling. The lock turned easily. She didn't open the door. Not yet. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner, and the last bouquet she'd thrown out because it made the whole living room look like an apology. She stood on the porch and let the wind cool the place between her collarbones where the hurt wanted to set up a tent. I see you, she said to the note, as if it were a person. Big. Final. Loud. A boy on a bicycle slowed. Red. Sped up. Somewhere, a dog barked. Selena imagined Adrian in his car, parked a block away, waiting for the text that would let him savor the moment. Saw it yet? He wanted her to flinch, to rip, to rage. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out a pen. Nothing dramatic, just a slim black liner she used for receipts. She traced the air beside the paper, measuring space, measuring steadiness, then tucked the pen away again. Not yet. The first move deserved silence. Her phone buzzed again. We're done, Selena. Don't make this messy. She turned the screen over so the message faced the wood of the step. You already did, she murmured. She pressed her thumb to the corner of the paper and felt the tackiness pull. She didn't peel it. She felt its claim and let it sit. Let it bake on the door a little longer, a flag he'd raised for his own parade. Bold, she said, her voice flat and gentle at once. You wanted the street to know. She picked up her tote, smoothed her skirt, and finally slid the key into the lock. The door opened with the same quiet click it always made. The house greeted her the way it always had. Neutral, available, willing to be whatever the people inside decided. Selina stepped through, calm, walking ahead of her like a well-trained dog. Behind her, the paper waited, white as a surrender flag, and certain it wasn't one. She smiled then, just a fraction, and closed the door softly. The house met her with tidy rooms and the faint citrus of cleaner, a place that pretended nothing had happened on the porch. Selina set her toad on the entry table and stood perfectly still until the urge to react burned itself out. She opened a window. Air slid in, light slipped to the floorboards, and the quiet stopped feeling like a trap. She walked to the living room shelf and took down a leather box, the one with passport copies, a spare checkbook, and the deed from her aunt's estate. The paper whispered open. Title in, Selina Hartwell. Purchased 2 years before Adrian Cole, before promises, before the kind of love that needs a lobby to be seen. Her mouth didn't move, but something in her eyes did. Her phone buzzed again. Don't ignore me. She flipped it face down, then flipped it back, then typed. Not ignoring. Calculating. She didn't hit send. She let the unsent words sit there like a held breath, then erased them letter by letter. The kettle clicked on. She poured water over a tea bag as if it were any afternoon, any day. Then she leaned an elbow on the counter and scrolled to Harper Vale. Realtor. Efficient. Unimpressed by dramatics. Exactly the kind of woman who wore neutral heels and carried a list of investors with cash on hand. Harper picked up on the second ring. Selina. That was fast. I was just thinking of you. Are you ready to? Yes, Selina said, cutting gently. I want quiet. I want speed. I want cash. No questions. Harper knew when a client had already done her crying. I have someone, Victor Hale. He'll buy a brick if it doesn't argue with him. He's in town until tonight. Show him the house at 5. Offer as is, 20-day close. Tell him I want proof of funds before he steps onto the porch. 5 works. You're sure? I'm past sure. Text me the address. Oh, never mind. I have it. I'll confirm in an hour. They rang off. The kettle popped again as if applauding. Selina dialed another number. Madeline Crane, estate attorney. Madeline's voice was precise, a ruler on a desk. Selina? Quick confirmation, Selina said. The house is still mine alone. Prenup covers it. No marital claim. That is correct, Madeline replied. Your aunt's bequest is separate property. Prenuptial agreement reinforced that. Are you anticipating a dispute? He's anticipating a spectacle, Selina said. I prefer paperwork. Then you're holding all the papers. If he threatens, you call me. I will. Selina paused. Thank you. She ended the call and let herself look around. On the mantel, a silver frame with a photo from last autumn. Both of them, leaves burning red behind their smiles, his arm snug around her waist like possession posing as affection. She lifted the frame and slid the photo out. No dramatic tearing. She just placed the picture in a drawer, closed it, and returned the empty frame to the mantel, bright and waiting. Footsteps on the path outside. Someone slowed, then moved on. The street was humming. Adrian's Theater always sold tickets. Selina sipped tea, then set the cup down and moved through the house with deliberate calm, the way you walk through a museum right before it closes. She gathered only what belonged to her bones. 3 dresses, 2 pairs of shoes, a stack of journals bound in linen, the fountain pen her father had given her when she got her first job. She slid jewelry into a pouch, the pieces she had bought for herself. The wedding ring lay on the bedside table, a circle without an idea. She left it there. Her phone lit. Harper Vale, Victor confirmed. 5 o'clock. Proof of funds attached. A PDF arrived, black numbers on white certainty. Selina saved it in a folder named after. The doorbell rang. Selina glanced at the clock. Too early for Harper, too early for Victor. She opened the door halfway. Mr. Blake stood on the porch, hat in hand, eyes kind. I'm making too much soup, he said. It's a medical condition. You'll help me with it. She smiled. You're a menace, Mr. Blake. He offered the container without peeking past her shoulder. If you need someone to stand on your porch and look bored, I'm available. I do an excellent impression of a man who has never heard of scandal. Thank you, she said, taking the soup. I may cast you later. He tipped his hat, retreated as gracefully as he'd arrived, and pretended not to notice the white sheet still glued to her blue door. When she closed it again, the house felt less like a stage and more like a tool. Selina set the soup on the counter and took out a blank sheet of paper. She wrote nothing. Not yet. She placed the pen across the top like a horizon line and checked the time. 3 hours to 5. Plenty of time to be precise. She opened the fireproof box once more and added the prenuptial agreement on top of the deed. 2 pages that said, in formal language, what she now felt in her bones. I am not yours to humiliate. Adrian texted again. We're over, Selina. Be out by the weekend. I'll handle the sale. She typed a reply, then backspaced until the field was clean. She slipped the phone into her pocket and let her smile arrive. Quiet and complete, the kind that didn't need witnesses. At 4:30, she tied her hair back with a silk ribbon, wiped the last fingerprints from the kitchen counter, and stood at the window to watch the late light settle across the lawn. She didn't glance at the door. She didn't need to. The first word had been his. The last word would be written in her hand. The clock struck 4:50. Shadows stretched across the front yard, long and thin, like fingers reaching for the house. Selina stood before the door, the white sheet Adrian had left now folded neatly on the counter inside. She studied the blank page lying on the console table. It was waiting for her, a canvas that would hold her final word. She sat down with her fountain pen. The ink flowed in dark strokes, her hand steady, her face calm. Divorce. He had wanted it in bold, a declaration pinned like a trophy for neighbors to see. Very well. She would give him something bolder. She wrote each letter in deliberate strokes, her handwriting large, elegant, and unforgiving. House sold. The words filled the page like a verdict. She leaned back, let the ink dry, and read it again, not with malice but with finality. There was no tremor in her hand, no catch in her breath. This wasn't anger. This was closure dressed as clarity. She rose, carried the page to the door, and taped it carefully over the space where his had been. The blue door, once a welcoming threshold, now bore a new truth in black ink. She stepped outside, crossed the porch, and stood on the sidewalk. The bold letters shone in the fading sunlight. Anyone passing would see. And Adrian. Oh, Adrian. He would see most of all. From across the street, Mrs. Hayward, the elderly woman with a small white dog, slowed her walk. She adjusted her glasses, squinted at the door, and froze. Her little dog tugged at the leash, impatient. Mrs. Hayward's lips parted, and then she chuckled, shaking her head. She gave Selina a nod, as if in silent applause, before walking on. Selina exhaled. It was enough. Not vengeance, just truth, plain and unavoidable. At 5 sharp, Harper's black sedan pulled up. She stepped out in her tailored blazer, clipboard in hand. Behind her, a silver SUV rolled to a stop. Victor Hale emerged, tall, salt and pepper hair, eyes that measured everything without seeming rushed. He didn't look at Selina at first. He looked at the lawn, the siding, the windows. Then his eyes landed on the door. Efficient signage, he remarked dryly. Harper's lips curved. She's very clear. Selina didn't flinch. Do you want to see the inside? Victor gave a single nod. Proof of funds is in your inbox, Harper. If the bones are as strong as the street looks, we'll keep this simple. They entered. Harper led him through each room with professional precision, pointing out the hardwood, the new roof, the updated wiring. Victor asked sparse questions, his mind working like a ledger. Selina answered evenly, her voice without embellishment. In the kitchen, Victor set down his briefcase. I'll take it. As is. 20-day close. Cash. Harper's pen scratched across her notepad. I'll draft the agreement tonight. Selina nodded. That's acceptable. Victor glanced once more toward the front door, then back at her. Bold move, Miss Hartwell. But bold sells. When they left, the house was silent again, except for the faint flutter of paper against wood where the evening breeze pressed at the door. Selina stood before it one last time. Her eyes traced the words. She thought of Adrian's smirk, his cruelty in turning pain into performance, his hunger for spectacle. And she thought of what awaited him when he came home. The irony wasn't lost on her. He had wanted to humiliate her. Instead, he had staged the very platform for his own undoing. She picked up her bag, checked the clock, it was nearly 6, and walked out into the cooling air. As she locked the door behind her, she whispered to herself, not bitter, not angry, but certain. This house doesn't belong to him. It never did. The street was quiet. Only the bold letters remained, taped firm against the blue paint. House sold. And soon, Adrian would see them. Adrian Cole walked down the street with his chest puffed out like a man returning from battle. He had left that morning convinced that he had finally delivered the decisive blow. Divorce. The word itself carried an edge he thought would cut through Selina's calm exterior. He pictured her broken, perhaps in tears, perhaps on her knees when he returned. The thought stroked his ego, feeding the arrogance he wore like a crown. The evening sun stretched across the neat row of houses as Adrian approached his own. A few neighbors lingered outside, watering plants, sweeping porches, or chatting idly. He welcomed the watchful eyes. Let them see his power. Let them see how he brought a woman to heel. His shoes tapped smartly against the pavement, and he smiled inwardly. Soon enough, she would be gone, and the house would remain his domain. But when his gaze shifted to the front door, his stride faltered. The familiar note was gone. In its place, another sheet of paper flapped faintly in the breeze. His brows knit as he stepped closer, a cold unease pressing against his chest. With a sharp motion, he ripped the paper free and read the bold black letters. House sold. The words mocked him in their simplicity, and for a moment he thought it must be a cruel joke. His jaw tightened, his fingers crumpling the paper as the color drained from his face. He blinked rapidly, as if hoping the message would transform back into his own declaration of divorce. But no, the ink was permanent, and the victory he had imagined now turned to ash in his mouth. Behind him, he could sense the shifting attention of the neighbors. The air grew heavier, filled with unspoken questions. He forced himself to stand straighter, though his chest no longer felt like armor. Instead, it was hollow, brittle, cracking with every second he lingered. Selina's smile returned to him in memory, not pained, not defeated, but calm, almost amused. She had not been broken. She had been planning, and she had struck deeper than he ever expected. Adrian's fist clenched around the paper until it tore. Rage and humiliation boiled together, but beneath them lay something he dared not name: fear. Fear that the balance of power had shifted, and that the woman he thought so meek had outmaneuvered him. He shoved open the door, his boots hitting the floorboards with violent purpose. The echo of his steps filled the house, but the sound no longer reassured him. The home didn't feel like his fortress anymore. It felt like a battlefield, and he was no longer certain he held the higher ground. "Selina," he barked, his voice harsh enough to rattle the windows. But the walls offered only silence, deep and cutting. The war he had thought already won had only just begun. The street had grown strangely alive after Adrian stormed into the house. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open just enough for curious eyes to peek through. The neighborhood was not large, and word traveled faster than the wind. By now, half the lane had already seen the bold note glued to the door before Adrian ripped it down. Across the street, Mrs. Green, a widow with sharp eyes and sharper memory, whispered to her companion, "Did you see that? Divorce in the morning, house sold by evening. That woman has more sense than he ever did." Her friend, a younger mother named Lila, covered her mouth to stifle a laugh. "Oh, he looked so proud walking down the road, strutting like a rooster. Now look at him, like a rooster with no tail feathers left." Their laughter, soft as it was, carried on the evening breeze. Others joined in with hushed comments, some sympathetic, some amused, but all circling the same truth. Adrian's arrogance had finally met its match. "He always thought he could control her," muttered an old man leaning on his cane by the corner store. "But pride makes a man blind. And when you're blind, you can't see the pit you're walking into." Inside the house, Adrian's angry footsteps echoed like thunder. The neighbors leaned in closer, listening for every shout, every slammed door. The walls could not keep secrets, not in a place where everyone already guessed the ending before the story was told. Children, still playing with marbles near the gutter, began mimicking Adrian's swagger, puffing their chests and stomping their feet until their mothers called them back with sharp warnings. Yet even the mothers could not hide the flicker of smiles on their lips. One voice rose above the rest, a neighbor named Howard, known for speaking without filter. He shook his head and said loudly enough for several to hear, A man who glues a divorce notice to his own door is no man at all. Selina deserved better long ago. I hope she doesn't come back. No one contradicted him. In fact, there was a collective nod, the kind that happens when truth is spoken aloud. From an upstairs window, a teenage girl scribbled notes into her diary. She had watched the whole scene unfold, the cruel message, the wife's silent smile, and now the husband's collapse. Her pen scratched quickly. Today I learned that sometimes the strongest people don't shout or fight. They smile and change everything with one move. The whispers grew, swirling into a quiet storm that Adrian could not stop. He had wanted the world to see his power. Instead, the world was now watching his humiliation. And though the neighbors' words faded as the streetlights flickered on, their meaning would remain. In this community, prideful men were remembered for their falls, while clever women were remembered for their victories. Adrian slammed the front door shut, the echo rattling through the hollow walls. The living room, once filled with polished furniture and the warmth of shared memories, now seemed colder, emptier, almost mocking him. He clutched the crumpled paper in his hand, the one worded in Selina's calm but devastating handwriting. House sold. His chest rose and fell in heavy bursts, rage fighting against disbelief. What trick is this, Selina? He barked into the silence, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. Where are you hiding? But there was no hiding. Selina had already gone. Just then, the faint sound of footsteps approached from the hallway. He turned sharply, only to see his wife's suitcase missing from its corner, the shoes she usually kept by the door also gone. A hollow laugh escaped his lips, though there was no joy in it. The door behind him creaked open. It wasn't Selina, it was Mrs. Green, who had dared to step inside, emboldened by the whispers outside. Adrian, she said softly but firmly, don't shout at empty rooms. She isn't here to hear you anymore. Adrian whipped around, anger flashing in his eyes. Who asked you to come inside? Get out. But Mrs. Green did not flinch. Behind her, Howard and Lila stepped in as well, curiosity driving them further than propriety allowed. Their faces carried no fear, only the stern satisfaction of witnesses who had seen too much arrogance finally collapse. You humiliated her, Howard said, pointing at the wrinkled note in Adrian's hand. You thought tearing her down would make you taller. Instead, she stood taller than you ever imagined. Adrian's face turned red. This is my house. My business. No one tells me how to run it, least of all her. But Lila's voice cut him like glass. Your house? Not anymore. You saw what she wrote. She sold it before your pride could stop her. The walls you boast about don't belong to you now. The weight of her words settled in the air like smoke, suffocating Adrian's breath. His fists clenched, trembling with a fury that had nowhere to go. She can't do this to me, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. She wouldn't dare. Wouldn't dare? Mrs. Green stepped closer, her eyes unblinking. She already dared. She already did. And all you can do now is stand in the ruins of what your pride destroyed. The silence that followed was unbearable. Adrian's chest heaved, his pride bleeding into panic, but no words came to save him. Outside, the whispers of the neighbors grew louder, pressing against the windows like a chorus of judgment. For the first time in years, Adrian felt small, smaller than the crowd, smaller than the wife he thought he controlled. The confrontation was not just with his neighbors, but with the truth itself. He had lost, and the night, heavy with shame, closed in around him. Adrian's footsteps thundered against the wooden floor as he stormed into the master bedroom. The air still carried Selina's faint perfume, a mocking reminder of her presence even in her absence. His veins burned with rage, his pride screaming louder than his thoughts. He slammed the crumpled paper against the wardrobe, the words sold staring back at him like a curse. She dares, he hissed under his breath, pacing like a trapped beast. She dares outsell me. Moments later, the front door creaked. Selina's voice floated in, calm, deliberate. Still pacing, Adrian? I thought you'd be celebrating your freedom. Adrian spun around as she stepped into the room. She carried herself with a serene strength, her posture firm, her eyes unshaken. The suitcase by her side was no longer a symbol of retreat. It was her declaration of independence. You think this is a joke? Adrian roared. You dare sell my house, the roof I built over us, without my permission. Selina placed the suitcase down gently, her composure unbroken. Your house? She asked softly, almost with pity. The deed was never yours alone, Adrian. Every brick was built with our lives, every corner with my sacrifices. And if you could reduce our marriage to a note on the door, why should I not reduce your fortress to the same? His fists clenched, trembling with fury. Do you know who I am? Do you think I'll let you disgrace me in front of the whole town? Selina's lips curved into a faint smile, not of mockery, but of clarity. You've already disgraced yourself. I only unveiled what you hid behind pride. Tell me, Adrian, did you think gluing a divorce notice to the door made you powerful? That humiliating your wife made you greater? No, it only made you smaller. Her words struck harder than any physical blow. He stumbled backward, his pride colliding with truth. You don't speak to me like that, he growled, but his voice faltered, softer than before. Oh, but I do, Selina said firmly, her tone sharper now. For too long, I was silent while you fed your arrogance. But today, you look around and see emptiness. That emptiness, Adrian, is not mine, it is yours. I still carry my dignity, my peace. What do you carry? Nothing but paper and pride. Adrian's chest heaved, his face contorted in frustration. For the first time, he had no clever retort, no thunderous authority. The walls he leaned on seemed foreign now, stripped of power by her decision. You'll regret this, Selina, he spat, though his voice cracked under the weight of defeat. Selina lifted her suitcase and turned toward the door. No, Adrian. You'll regret never knowing when to value what you had. Pride has a price, and today you're paying it in full. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked out, leaving Adrian drowning in the bitter fire of his own words. Adrian stood in the middle of the living room, his chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. The fury in him still boiled, but it no longer seemed to dominate the space. Instead, Selina's presence, quiet, steady, unyielding, drew the air around her. She had placed her suitcase by the doorway, her hand resting lightly on its handle, yet she didn't rush. He barked again, his pride clinging to the last threads of authority. Do you even understand what you've done, Selina? This isn't just about us. People will laugh. They'll say I couldn't control my own wife. My name will be dragged through the mud. Selina turned, her expression soft but firm, her words measured like an arrow aimed at the heart of his pride. Adrian, your name has never been mine to protect. For years, I watched you paraded as if it were a crown, while I bore the weight of your silence and your arrogance. Do you think the whispers started today? No, Adrian. They began the moment you chose pride over love. He froze, her words hanging in the room like unshakable truth. Selina walked slowly toward him, her steps deliberate. You wanted a stage, so you glued your words to the door for everyone to see. But you didn't expect the curtain to fall on you. Tell me what's worse, that I sold this house, or that you underestimated the woman you thought would remain quiet forever. Adrian's throat tightened. He wanted to roar, to push her words away with the force of anger, but his lips faltered. He had built his power on fear and control, but now she wielded calmness like a sword, and every slash cut deeper than his rage ever could. You could have come to me, spoken to me like a man, like a husband. Selina continued, her tone neither bitter nor cruel, only steady, like someone finally stepping into her strength. But instead, you chose humiliation. You wanted me broken. Instead, you find me unshaken. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his voice lower now, laced with a hint of desperation. You don't understand. I couldn't lose face in front of the community. I had to show. Selina's sharp voice cut in, not raised, but decisive. No, Adrian. You had to show pride. And pride never feeds anyone, it only burns. Look around you. You were so afraid of looking small that you made yourself even smaller. Do you think anyone respects a man who cannot respect his own wife? The words silenced the room completely. Adrian's shoulders sagged, his fists unclenched. For the first time, his silence wasn't power, it was surrender. Selina picked up her suitcase again, her eyes unwavering. You wanted victory. Instead, you have emptiness. Remember this, Adrian. Sometimes calmness is the loudest answer. And mine has spoken louder than your pride ever could. Without waiting for his reply, she walked past him, leaving him staring at the fading echo of her words. The silence after Selina left the living room pressed down on Adrian like a weight he could not shake. His anger had drained, leaving behind something colder, something more dangerous, realization. The boldness of her words still echoed in his ears, every syllable cutting through the armor of pride he had so carefully forged over the years. He turned his eyes to the wall where her note had once been pinned. House sold. The phrase replayed in his mind with relentless force. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a mirror showing him his defeat, a defeat not delivered by fists or fury, but by intellect and resolve. Stumbling toward the door, Adrian yanked it open as if expecting to catch her still outside. But the street was empty. Only the faint whispers of neighbors lingered, eyes peering from behind curtains, murmurs trailing after him like smoke. Their silence spoke volumes. They had seen it all, his triumph reduced to ashes, his pride stripped bare. She's gone, he muttered to himself, but the sound of his own voice only made the truth sharper. He paced the floor, his mind frantic. He had always believed power belonged to the loudest voice, the sharpest command, the boldest claim. Yet today, Selina had proved him wrong. She had not screamed, nor begged, nor pleaded for her dignity. Instead, she had stood calm, and in that calmness, she had dismantled him. For the first time, Adrian felt the tables truly turn. He wasn't the man who had outsmarted his wife. He was the man who had underestimated her, who had let his arrogance blind him to her quiet strength. His hand brushed the wall as he walked through the house, each step echoing through the empty rooms. Every corner reminded him of her presence. The books she left neatly stacked, the curtains she had chosen, the faint scent of lavender still clinging to the hallway. And yet, despite all that remained, he realized the truth. None of it was his anymore. The papers were real. The sale had gone through. His claim over the house, his victory, his pride, gone. Adrian collapsed into a chair, his breath shallow. He wanted to curse her name, to call her reckless, heartless, ungrateful. But even those words wouldn't come. Deep inside, he knew the truth. She had done what he never expected. She had chosen herself over him. It struck him then. The community wouldn't mock her. They would admire her courage, her wit, her refusal to bend. And him? He would be the story they whispered about at night. The man who thought he was bigger than his wife, only to be outmatched by her wisdom. Adrian leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, the proud man felt something he had always denied himself: humility. The tables had turned, and he was the one left to taste the bitter fruit of his own pride. Adrian wandered through the house with slow, dragging steps, the weight of silence pressing in from every corner. The air felt heavy, different, as though the house itself no longer recognized him as its master. His footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, hollow and mocking, reminding him of all that had slipped through his grasp. The living room, once alive with conversations and Selina's quiet laughter, now stood like a stranger. The bookshelves were bare in places where she had taken her treasured novels. The little vase she adored, always filled with fresh flowers, sat empty and dry. Even the cushions on the sofa carried an absence he couldn't ignore. He climbed the stairs, one hand brushing along the railing. Every step up felt heavier than the last, as if he were dragging his pride along with him, and it resisted every inch. In their bedroom, sunlight spilled in through the window, but it didn't warm him. Her clothes were gone from the wardrobe. Only his remained, hanging lifeless, like reminders of his solitude. On her side of the dresser, the perfumes and jewelry had vanished. All that was left was a faint trace of her lavender scent, clinging stubbornly to the walls. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space where she used to rest. For years, he had dismissed her presence as ordinary, a background detail in the grand stage of his life. Now, stripped of her quiet companionship, the emptiness revealed how deeply woven into his world she had been. Selina, he whispered her name, but the walls gave no answer. Moving into the kitchen, Adrian's eyes caught the small details that tore at his chest. The mugs she used for tea were gone. The jars she carefully labeled with spices, emptied. Even the dining table seemed larger without her presence, its silence unbearable. He pulled out a chair and sat, but the quiet mocked him, and he pushed away again, restless. Room after room, Adrian realized the same truth. Nothing belonged to him anymore. The legal transfer had sealed it, but the hollow feeling in his chest was worse than any document could ever state. The house was no longer his home. It was a shell, and he was the intruder. Outside, faint voices of neighbors floated through the open window. They spoke in hushed tones, their words too soft to catch, but their meaning was clear. They knew. Everyone knew. The mighty Adrian, the man who had declared himself lord over his own home, had been undone. He pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold floor. Pride had built this prison around him, and now he sat alone, surrounded by emptiness that screamed louder than any words ever could. For the first time in years, Adrian felt small. Not the master of a home, not the victor of an argument, but a man staring into the ruins of his own arrogance. Adrian was still sitting on the floor when the knock came. It was not sharp or demanding, just a gentle rapping that carried more patience than curiosity. He dragged himself up, reluctant to face whoever dared come to his door, but the voice that followed was familiar. "Adrian, it's me, Daniel." Daniel had been his closest friend since boyhood, a man who had stood beside him through both triumphs and failures. With a heavy sigh, Adrian opened the door. His friend stepped in, eyes sweeping the half-empty house, and the weight of understanding fell across his face. "So, it's true," Daniel murmured, his tone neither mocking nor surprised, but sorrowful. He placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder. "I told you once, pride has sharp teeth. I feared one day it would bite you." Adrian bristled. "Don't come here to lecture me. You don't know what she did. She humiliated me." His voice cracked, betraying more pain than anger. Daniel studied him quietly. "Humiliation? Or did she simply show you the mirror you refused to look into?" Adrian turned away, pacing the hall. His fists clenched. "She sold the house, Daniel. The very roof over my head, gone. Tell me, how is that not betrayal?" "Because you betrayed her long before," Daniel replied firmly, his voice low but unyielding. "You wrote that cruel message on your door for the whole world to see. You stripped her dignity in public, Adrian. What did you expect her to do? Bow her head and thank you?" The words pierced through him, and for a moment, Adrian felt exposed. He wanted to deny it, to shout that Daniel was wrong, but deep down, he knew his friend spoke only truth. Daniel walked slowly into the living room, gesturing at the empty shelves and barren corners. "Look around you. This was not her doing, it was yours. Pride has a way of hollowing a man before he even realizes it. You thought dominance was love. You thought silence was loyalty. But love is not built on fear, Adrian. It's built on respect. And when you tore hers away, she took back her life." Adrian's jaw tightened. His pride still struggled to let go, but his heart ached with every word. "So, what do I do now?" he asked at last, his voice quieter than Daniel had ever heard it. "You learn," Daniel said, his expression softening. "You face the truth you've avoided. Maybe it's too late to bring her back, but it's not too late to change yourself. If you don't, Adrian, this house won't be the only thing you lose. You'll lose yourself." The silence that followed carried more weight than any argument. Daniel's words lingered in the air like an unshakable truth, settling deep into Adrian's chest. For the first time, he realized he stood at a crossroads. Humble himself, or let pride destroy what little remained. The next morning, Adrian tried to carry himself with the same swagger he once wore like armor. He walked through the marketplace, his head held high, but his eyes darted nervously, catching every whisper, every glance that lingered too long. The villagers who once greeted him with respect now covered their mouths to stifle laughter. Others shook their heads, pity mixed with scorn. For months, Adrian had strutted like a peacock, boasting about his wealth, commanding his wife as though she were furniture. Now, with the house gone and his wife's bold note still a topic of gossip, he was reduced to a shadow of that proud man. "Did you hear?" one woman whispered to another near the fruit stall. "He told her he wanted a divorce, and she sold the house instead." The other laughed, nearly dropping the basket she held. "Serves him right. That poor woman deserves better than him." Adrian's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to silence them all, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he pushed forward, pretending not to hear. Yet every step only drew more murmurs. A group of young men lounging by the well chuckled as he passed. "Hey Adrian," one called mockingly, "looking for a new house? Maybe try the stables, they're cheaper." The others erupted in laughter. Heat flared in Adrian's cheeks, and his fists curled at his sides. Once, his presence alone was enough to command silence. Now, Even boys dared to jeer at him. At the tailor's shop, old Mrs. Green shook her head when she saw him. Pride, she said loudly to no one in particular, though her eyes never left him. It eats a man whole before he knows he's empty. That wife of his had more courage than most. Her words landed harder than any insult. Adrian felt stripped, his image unraveling in front of those who once admired him. He quickened his pace, but the whispers followed like shadows. He knew it wasn't just gossip, it was judgment, a story spreading through the village like wildfire. He had thought himself untouchable, but now his downfall had become entertainment. Finally, he reached the edge of the market where an old farmer leaned on his cane, watching him with steady eyes. Unlike the others, the farmer did not laugh or whisper. He simply said, "Adrian, you built your house on pride. And when the storm came, it collapsed. Let this be a lesson, because everyone else has already learned it from watching you." The simple truth of it stung worse than the mockery. Adrian stood frozen, the weight of humiliation pressing down until his once proud shoulders sagged. He turned away, his steps heavy, realizing that he was no longer a man others envied. He had become the tale parents would tell their children, a warning carved into whispers. Pride destroys the proud. Days turned into weeks, and the echoes of laughter that followed Adrian everywhere finally grew faint, replaced by silence that felt even heavier. Pride had stripped him of his home, his honor, and the woman who once looked at him with love. Now, he found himself standing at the edge of his former life, clutching at the fraying threads of what remained. One evening, as dusk painted the sky with fading streaks of gold, Adrian walked the narrow path that led to Margaret's new dwelling. Word had reached him that she was living with her sister, Emily, in a small but warm cottage at the edge of the village. Each step felt like walking barefoot on thorns, but regret gave him no rest. He had to see her. He knocked softly, almost as if he feared the sound of his own hand. When the door opened, Margaret stood before him, her face calm, her posture steady. She looked neither angry nor surprised. She looked free. Behind her, the faint sound of children's laughter floated through the air, her nephews playing, her family close. "Margaret," Adrian said, his voice breaking on her name. "Please, let me explain. I was wrong. So wrong." She studied him, her eyes searching his face. There was once a time when such words would have melted her heart, but now, they felt like raindrops on stone. "Explain what, Adrian? That you tried to humiliate me in front of the world? That you chose pride over love? I already know." His knees nearly buckled, but he steadied himself against the doorframe. "I thought I was teaching you strength. I thought I was showing you control, but I only destroyed what mattered most. Margaret, I can't sleep. I can't think. I just want you back." Her lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "You want me back, Adrian? Or do you just want the life you lost?" He faltered, unable to answer. Deep down, even he didn't know. "I carried your pride on my back for years," she continued, her tone firm but not unkind. "But when I finally chose myself, I realized I had been walking in your shadow far too long. I won't return to that darkness." Adrian reached out, his hand trembling. "Margaret, please. Forgive me. Give me another chance." But she stepped back, gently closing the door halfway between them, a barrier more powerful than walls. "I don't hate you, Adrian. In fact, I hope you learn from this. But forgiveness does not always mean return. My peace is not yours to take back." The door clicked shut, leaving Adrian alone on the doorstep, his apologies swallowed by the quiet of the night. For the first time, he felt the weight of true loss. Not the loss of a house or reputation, but the loss of a woman who had found her strength by leaving him behind. Regret burned in his chest like ashes that could never be rekindled into flame. The morning after Margaret's quiet rejection, Adrian sat alone on a wooden bench outside the tavern. His clothes, once crisp and proudly pressed, now looked worn and loose on his frame. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now carried the hollow look of a man stripped of everything he thought he owned. For years, Adrian believed himself untouchable. He had wealth, status, and a home that neighbors admired. Yet in the span of weeks, everything had unraveled, leaving him with nothing but the bitter taste of pride turned sour. His house sold. His wife gone. His reputation reduced to whispers that haunted him wherever he walked. As he sat there, a few men strolled past, shaking their heads and muttering just loud enough for him to hear. "There goes Adrian. thought he was king of the street. Now he's just another fool with nothing. The words stung more than he cared to admit. Once, he would have barked back, demanded respect. But now, he simply lowered his head. Their words were true. He looked at his hands. Hands that once signed property deeds. Hands that once dictated decisions in his household without question. Now, they were just empty, trembling slightly as though they knew the truth before his heart could admit it. Power and pride could slip through fingers faster than sand. That evening, Adrian returned to what had once been his home. The grand wooden door no longer bore his mark. The new owners had replaced the lock. He lingered outside, staring at the windows that no longer belonged to him. Through the glass, he saw a family laughing around a dinner table. The house was alive, full of warmth, but none of it was his. He pressed his palm against the cool surface of the wall, as though the house might remember him, but it gave nothing back. It was no longer his shelter, no longer his proof of pride. It belonged to someone else now, and so did the life that came with it. Adrian turned away, shoulders slumped, and made his way to a small rented room above the blacksmith shop. The space was cramped, the air heavy with the smell of iron and soot. A narrow bed, a cracked basin, and a single chair greeted him. No portraits, no furniture polished to shine, no Margaret. Just emptiness. He sat on the edge of the bed and buried his face in his hands. Memories came flooding back. The first time Margaret moved into their home. The way she decorated it with flowers. The meals they once shared at the table. It was all gone, swallowed by his reckless pride. For the first time, he realized how little material wealth mattered when a heart was empty. A house could be rebuilt, riches could be regained, but the trust and love of a woman like Margaret? That was priceless, and it was gone forever. Adrian looked again at his hands, now resting limply on his knees. They were truly empty, not just of possessions, but of purpose. And no matter how tightly he tried to close his fists, they could no longer hold on to the life he had foolishly cast away. Margaret walked down the path leading to her mother's home, her steps steady and graceful, as though each one carried her farther away from the chains of the past. The sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing her face in warmth, and for the first time in a long while, she felt light. In her hands, she carried only a small bundle of clothes. The rest she had willingly left behind, not because she had nothing, but because she no longer measured her worth by material things. The papers declaring the house sold had been more than a blow to Adrian's pride. They had been a declaration of her freedom. Her mother greeted her at the door with tears in her eyes. "My child," she whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "You are safe now." Margaret held her tightly. "Yes, mother. I am safe. And I am free." Inside, her brothers sat waiting, their faces filled with concern that melted into relief as soon as they saw her smile. They had feared she would return broken, but instead she carried a quiet strength that surprised even them. That evening, the family sat together at the table, sharing bread and laughter. Margaret spoke little, but her silence was not heavy. It was peaceful. Every bite she took tasted like a fresh beginning, every laugh a piece of her heart mending. Word spread quickly through the village of what had transpired. People admired Margaret not only for her courage, but also for the wisdom with which she had acted. A woman of strength, they whispered. She did not let herself be humiliated. She found her own way. A few days later, Margaret began to rebuild her life. She helped her mother with the household chores. She visited the market with a calm smile, and when neighbors stopped to greet her, she answered with warmth. No bitterness lingered in her words, only lessons, quietly carried. One evening, her younger brother asked, "Do you not regret it, sister? The house, the wealth, the life you shared?" Margaret looked at him gently. A house without peace is not a home. Wealth without respect is a burden. And a marriage without love is a prison. What I left behind was never mine in truth. What I carry now, my dignity, my family, my peace, this is worth more than all of it. Her words lingered, echoing softly in the hearts of those around her. The strength in her eyes became a beacon not only for her family, but for other women in the village who had once felt powerless. Margaret's path was no longer tied to Adrian's shadow. She carved her own way, with wisdom as her compass and freedom as her reward. Where once her life had been defined by silence and endurance, now it was shaped by choice. And as she closed her eyes that night, resting in the comfort of her mother's house, she smiled to herself. The past was behind her, the future wide open. She had walked through fire and emerged unburned, stronger, wiser, and free. Margaret rose early the next morning, the first rays of dawn spilling through the small window of her mother's home. She sat quietly for a moment, listening to the gentle rustle of the trees outside. For the first time in years, her heart was free of fear, and her spirit rested in calm. The old burdens had fallen away, and what remained was the wisdom that only fire and pain could refine. As she stepped outside, the village children ran past her, laughing as they carried pails of water. One of them paused to wave at her, his little face bright with admiration. Margaret smiled back, realizing that even the young had heard the tale. She had become more than just a woman escaping her husband's cruelty. She was now a lesson, a living story that would be told around firesides for generations. Neighbors approached her in the days that followed, speaking softly with respect. "Margaret," one woman said, "you carried yourself with such strength. You reminded us all that silence does not mean weakness, and calm does not mean surrender." Margaret answered with humility. "It was not strength alone that saved me. It was wisdom. The wisdom to know when to endure and when to walk away. The wisdom to value peace over pride." Her words carried, not as boasts, but as truths that resonated deeply in the hearts of those who listened. And though the memory of Adrian's arrogance lingered in whispers, it was Margaret's calm defiance that shaped the story that endured. Her mother often watched her with pride, thinking, "My daughter is no longer just my child. She is a teacher for all who live here." The brothers, too, admired her. They had wanted to protect her with fists and anger, but she had shown them another path. That true victory was not always won in shouting matches or broken walls, but in the steady courage to rise above humiliation. One evening, Margaret sat by the fire, her hands folded in her lap. The sky was painted with the colors of twilight, and the village gathered for their evening stories. An elder pointed toward her and said, "Here sits Margaret, who carried herself with dignity when she was most tested. Let her journey remind us all. Wisdom is a lantern in dark times, and those who hold it will never lose their way." Margaret did not speak, but her smile was enough. The lesson had already been carved into the hearts of her people. She had not only survived, she had become a symbol of what it meant to endure with grace and to triumph with wisdom. And so, her sorrow was carried away, not by vengeance, not by bitterness, but by the strength of wisdom and the love of those who stood beside her. She was free, not just in body, but in spirit. The evening air was cool, the kind of calm that seemed to wash the day's troubles away. Margaret sat beside her mother on the veranda, their chairs facing the fading sunset. The old woman, Eleanor, leaned on her cane, her sharp eyes softening as they studied her daughter's profile. For a long time, silence lingered between them, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant laughter of the children in the square. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice rich with the weight of age and experience. "My child," she said, "life has tested you harder than most. But remember, every fire either consumes or refines. You, Margaret, have been refined." Margaret turned to her mother, her eyes glistening with both gratitude and the quiet ache of memories still fresh. "Mama, there were nights I thought I wouldn't survive. I kept asking myself why I had to bear such cruelty. But now, I see it. If I hadn't endured, I wouldn't have discovered this strength." Eleanor reached for her hand and held it tightly. Strength is not in the fists or in the loudness of one's voice. It is in knowing when to walk away and when to hold your head high. You showed the world that wisdom outlasts pride. Never forget that, Margaret. Margaret breathed deeply, taking her mother's words into her heart. And what of Adrian? What of men who let pride blind them? Her mother shook her head slowly. "Pride is a poison, my child. A man may drink it thinking it will make him strong, but in the end, it eats him from within. Adrian's downfall is his own making. And though people will mock him, his true punishment is the silence of his own empty heart." Margaret nodded, her chest loosening with a sense of release. For years, she had carried the weight of Adrian's anger and arrogance, believing herself to be chained to his moods. But her mother's words made it clear, she was never the one bound. He was bound to his own pride. Eleanor patted her hand gently. "Listen well, Margaret. The world will always have men like Adrian, and women who will be tempted to endure quietly, thinking submission is survival. But you must tell your story, so no woman will mistake silence for weakness. Your tale must endure, because wisdom is not meant to be hidden. It is a lamp for others in the dark. Margaret smiled softly, tears tracing down her cheeks. I promise, Mama, I will not let my story fade. I will tell it, so it can protect others. Her mother's eyes shone with pride. Then you have already won, my child. More than any revenge, more than any wealth. Wisdom is the inheritance you will pass on. As the night deepened, Margaret leaned against her mother's shoulder, finding comfort in the woman who had carried her through the storms of life. The elder's advice was more than words. It was the final seal on Margaret's healing and the compass for the path ahead. The morning sun spilled over the rooftops of the village, gilding every stone and tree with a golden glow. The people gathered in the square, their voices low with the lingering curiosity of what had unfolded between Margaret and Adrian. Children sat cross-legged near the fountain, eager to hear the tale retold, while elders leaned on their walking sticks, nodding with knowing eyes. At the center stood Eleanor, Margaret's mother, her gray hair glinting in the light. She tapped her cane gently on the ground, and silence fell over the crowd. Listen well, she began, her voice carrying the weight of truth. For this is not only a tale of one family, but a lesson for us all. Pride is a storm. It may thunder, it may boast, it may shake the earth beneath your feet. But when it passes, what does it leave behind? Emptiness, broken walls, regret like ashes. The villagers murmured in agreement, their eyes shifting to where Adrian once stood tall in arrogance, but now slunk past with lowered head, stripped of all his former grandeur. Eleanor's gaze softened as she turned toward Margaret, who stood quietly by her side. Wisdom, my children, is different. Wisdom is not loud. It does not pound its chest. It is like a tree, firm in the storm, rooted deep, sheltering all who come beneath its branches. Margaret chose wisdom over pride, and in doing so, she found her freedom. A hush lingered in the air, the words sinking deep into every heart present. Mothers held their daughters a little closer. Fathers looked to their sons with silent prayers. Even the young boys in the crowd, who had once cheered Adrian's brash laughter, now saw him as a shadow of what pride could do. Margaret stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. What was taken from me was not my worth, nor my dignity. Those are things no one can strip away, not even a husband with pride sharp as a knife. I walked away because I learned that silence is not surrender, it can be strength. And strength, when guided by wisdom, builds a future no arrogance can destroy. The crowd erupted in gentle applause, not of celebration, but of respect. In that moment, Margaret's story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to them all, a folktale carved into memory, a warning, and a guide for generations to come. The sun climbed higher, and as the villagers dispersed, Eleanor whispered to her daughter, "Your story will live, Margaret. Not just in books, but in the choices of those who heard it today." Margaret smiled, her eyes lifting to the sky as though in gratitude. "Then let it endure, Mama. Let it save others from the weight of pride." And so the story closed, not in bitterness, but in wisdom. A lesson carried from one heart to another, from one generation to the next. Pride destroys the proud, but wisdom saves the humble. Before you go, remember, share this tale so its lesson may reach others. Don't forget to like this story, subscribe for more, and join us again for the next unforgettable folktale.